Welcome to White Guys for Kamala. I'm your host, John Ennis. This is my co-host, Morley. Our guest this week is accomplished street artist Plastic Jesus, and we'll be talking about the Kamala Harris campaign and how modern men can make a difference. So our opening subject is going to be self-pity. Self-pity is I've discovered it's a very negative force that allows people to start to justify things that once they feel bad for themselves, they start to be able to take it out for others. Something I've learned is that it blocks accountability. If you start to feel sorry for yourself, then it creates this cycle of like, well, then nothing was my fault. All these things happened to me, and then once you start taking it out on other people, it justifies that kind of resentment. And so once you're doing that can deny empathy, which is something we talked about on an earlier episode as well. What are some of your thoughts about self-pity and the sort of force that it creates?
Well, for me, I think, especially, when talking about this subject in conjunction with white guys and, certainly white Western males, white American males, I think there certainly is this idea of, woe is me. And you see it even extend, obviously, especially on the right in terms of, this being a sort of like a culture of victimization. Both sides accuse the other of doing it, but it certainly seems a lot more silly when you see it, manifest in like, they're trying to take Christmas away from us, or, somehow that person having the bare minimum rights impedes on me having every version of right that I want to have, and so, I think that my first thought always comes to this sort of idea of like, who can be the martyr more, who can be the person who is wronged more, and who needs to make up for that, I think what you said right off the bat was very accurate in terms of it being something that blocks accountability, And then the other thing I think about is I was once told that the difference between jealousy and envy, and we talked about this a little while ago, that the difference between jealousy and envy is jealousy is you don't like that somebody has something. Rather, let me start over. Jealousy is basically you see something that somebody else has and you want it, but envy is you want it and you don't want them to have it. You want to be able to like take it away from them. And I think, a lot of times when we're looking at self-pity, we see a lot of that, this idea that it's not just even enough that I don't have that too. It's that I want it and I don't want you to have it because you having it means that it's less special to me. We see that a lot, I think, with the rights and with, certain levels of influence and all that stuff. And so for me, I think it all kind of comes into the same sort of toxic gumbo, What do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting concept to open with and get your head around. I think it's one that is prevalent in society now. This self-pity that the situation that you find yourself is outside of your control is because of your environment, because of other people, perhaps because of religion or society or economics. Now, if you're blaming any one of those or all of those things on your current poor condition, and by poor I just don't mean financially poor, but situation, how can you take pride and claim success for those achievements that you have if it's outside of your control? How can the negative influences be outside your control, but all those positive things that you do well, that you achieve,
right,
they must be outside your control as well. So I think it's very interesting, and I think Morley hit on a word that's very, very important in this conversation as well, and that is rights. A lot of the right, politically,
sure,
look at rights, and I'm not just talking about in the US. I'm talking about worldwide. A lot of people, particularly on the right, look at rights as being a pie. If somebody has more rights than you therefore have less rights. And, that seems to be, again, it's all somebody else's fault. It's self-pity. It's outside of my control. And right. I think it's a very negative mindset and state and condition to be in. And I think a lot of people live in that condition most of their lives now.
Mm-hmm. It's so much more satisfying to feel like all of these forces have pushed you down rather than to empower yourself or to take responsibility and to change what you can. I think it's interesting because I think a lot about people that are very fixated on conspiracy theories. And one of the things that was really interesting to me when I sort of realized this was that in some ways it's scarier to think that terrible things happen in this world, that people are assassinated, or that, children are abducted and molested, horrible things like that. Even that a virus can spread out and become a pandemic. That it's horrible to recognize those things, and yet the idea that someone else controlled them, someone else was responsible for them, someone actually, maneuvered things in the right way to make that thing happen is actually more, you have more control, because then it's the idea of like, well, that's just a person. I'm not just sort of shackled to the randomness and chaos of an unfair world. I can see that there are evil people, and evil people can be stopped if we just use our brains and have our little QAnon kind of group. We can figure out how to stop these problems and figure out who's to blame for it. And therefore, even though it seems more like, ominous, this idea of like, oh, all these people work together to assassinate John F. Kennedy. What's more terrifying is the idea of like, no, one guy can do it. One crazy guy can do it with one rifle and just, whatever perfect circumstances that aligned, that's enough. And that is interesting to me, this idea that what we can't control, sometimes if we maneuver our minds around it enough, we can figure out ways to make even the things that seem completely out of our control somehow fixable. Or at least complain about them and say, oh, well, it's these guys, these are the people to blame, And I think that kind of all works together in this sort of self-pitying way,
So speaking of self-pity, we're going to look at some of the artwork that Plastic Jesus has done.
Sorry, can I interrupt?
Oh, please.
You can call me Nick.
I can call you Nick.
Let's keep it informal.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
All right.
Keep it Nick. As Plastic Jesus, he's done some work here. This is one of my favorites, is his series of anti-Trump pieces that he put on at Trump's Walk of Fame on Hollywood Boulevard. He built a border wall around Trump's star, and you can see how many people are taking pictures of it. And I think this got some good news coverage, did it not?
Yeah, it did. It went viral. It was one of those art pieces that came to me almost in a moment. Trump said, we're going to build a big, beautiful wall. And obviously I wanted to do something about that. And I don't know if, Morley, you find the same thing. You can either ponder on an idea for a long time, days, weeks, even months, and you still can't nail that one creative piece that tells that story. But this was completely the opposite. I wanted to do something. In fact, I was driving home from the studio, probably stuck on the 10 or wherever. And the idea came in my head as I was driving, and I didn't drive home. I actually drove to Hollywood Boulevard, measured up the star, went back to the studio and started making it. And I thought it was an okay piece, but it just took off the next day. 2 days later, it got millions of views online, which as an artist is great because you're there, as we all know, to get messages out, to get opinions out. And you can't do it better than a piece going viral.
Yeah.
I just have one question. Did Mexico pay for it?
Well, I've got a confession to make. My original plan was actually to make a star-shaped wall. But when I was in the studio, it was clear my woodworking skills were nowhere near good enough.
Well,
it ended up as a square.
Well, you worry sometimes that like you can out clever yourself because you might have done that and it would have looked great, but then someone might have not registered it as a wall in the same way. They might have said like, oh, is it a frame?
Exactly.
I'm always blown away by how much you think you've sort of communicated what you want, and then you realize like, oh wow, I got to really communicate even more simpler than that. Sometimes when you sort of overhear people's reactions to things,
there's always that balance between getting a piece which is edgy, it's on that kind of border of being almost offensive to some people, but not too offensive to get attention, and also kind of be sharp enough to hit that nerve.
Right.
You can make a beautiful piece of art, but it doesn't convey that message. There's actually a video that I think one of my assistants took. The biggest issue we had on Hollywood Boulevard with that piece was Edward Scissorhand, who normally uses that spot to
Sure.
scalp.
Ply his trade.
Yeah, to scalp tourists for photos. And he was really pissed off because my wall was getting all the attention. So after we'd left the wall there and backed off, he came along and actually started kicking it down the street. So I went and picked it up. And there's a video of me with this wall under my arm and Edward Scissorhand chasing me down Hollywood Boulevard.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's surreal.
Yeah.
There's symbolism there. I can't.
I know.
place it.
We'll
There's
work on
something-
that. Yeah,
I'll come back to that
we'll
one.
come back.
There's something.
I have a quick
there's meme
question.
there.
So obviously you're from London
I'm from
originally.
London, yes.
When did you come to the States?
I came in 2007. I
Okay.
came for a year or two.
Right. And so I feel like a lot of people, especially when they come to a sort of adoptive country, don't necessarily feel the same desire to make some statements about the political scene here. So I guess I'm curious as to other than just, basic humanity and sort of seeing injustice and feeling that that's something that needs to be commented on, was there anything specific that kind of drew you to making political statements, even as a person who wasn't a Native American? That sounded weird. Even as a person who wasn't
Native
born
of America.
Yeah.
I don't know how you say that correctly.
Yeah.
That's an interesting question. Before I came here, I wasn't that political. I was, as some people may know, many people won't, I was a news photographer for 20 odd years. And I was a news photographer because I had a deep belief in documenting history, documenting opinions, documenting people and their feelings and their opinions and their emotions about things and the way those things were changing the world. And I was probably a news photographer because I can't write particularly well. If I could, I would have been a journalist. So
Sure.
news photography for me was a way to convey those things. And a good news photo should be able to convey a message. It should show what's happened, why it's happened, and if possible, the human cost of that incident,
right.
that event, or whatever.
It's storytelling.
Yeah, exactly. And as a news photographer, you have to try and nail that story to one image that hopefully goes on the front or inside a newspaper. That one image, you have one chance to tell that story. Whether there's perhaps a documentary filmmaker, that story is, that narrative is constructed in the edit room.
Right.
So it's completely different with a news story as a photographer. So I suppose that there was that side of it that was coming out. And it was my disillusionment with the way the news industry was going. As a news photographer, you cover real news stories. I went out to Haiti for the big earthquake there. I was in Bosnia and Kosovo for the end of the war out there. I was covering a lot of civil unrest and things like that around the world. And mixed into that, you would get your celebrity news type stories. I have a confession that I was probably the world's worst news photographer to come to Hollywood because I have no interest in celebrity culture whatsoever. But I did find in the mid 2000, the 2010 onwards, 2012, that more and more news stories I was being asked to cover were reality TV show and almost kind of gossip type story. So I became disillusioned with that industry and wanted to recreate myself as a different type of photographer. And it just so worked out that I was getting I started doing street art, which had this political or cultural edge to it. And I was getting a lot of people that were giving me good positive feedback. I was clearly engaging with a lot of thoughts that people were having, and the way I was conveying them seemed to resonate with people.
It's interesting that you went from something that is more about observing and something to then creating something that is more about interacting, especially interacting in a public setting, which is not something that's just like, and this is no disrespect to art in a gallery, but you're injecting something into someone else's world versus just observing and reporting it, And I find it fascinating that you can take kind of what you learned or gleaned from years of observing and photographing, whether it's just the behaviors of humans, both, benign and malignant. And then you can sort of turn that into something that can then reflect back on them, So I find that very fascinating that you come at it with that kind of history, and I think it really informs how your work comes out, and how people interact with it. I think your desire to sort of reach people that way.
Yeah, there's an interesting kind of perspective which maybe throws a bit more light on the similarity in what I do now to what I did before, and I hadn't been in the US long, and I went over to New York for a masterclass workshop with a photo organization called 7 V11. They're probably the best documentary news photographers in the world. And there was one of the guys there who was, I think it was Croatian, very strong accent, and he was talking to us and with a slideshow running through some pictures that he took. But instead of using the word, "This is a photo I took," he would use, "This is a photo I made."
I love that,
And
yeah.
I thought, oh, it must just be his English isn't very good.
Right.
And then I thought about it. As the photographer, no, you make that image.
Huh.
You effectively control everything within that image, and it's down to you and what you see through your own eyes and what you will see through that camera that will convey the message that you want to convey through that image. You're not taking a snapshot in time, you're conveying a message. And as a good news photographer, you should be able to make an image that does that. So as John said, I think it's not a mistake of the guy's English. I think it's a very good understanding of what a news photographer does.
That's great.
In the same way, a journalist won't write an account of something. They'll effectively write a story which will bring emotion and opinion and background in.
Yeah. A lot of people, I recently read a thing that was about the frustration with journalists covering something, wanting to cover it, without seeming like they're being biased against Donald Trump. But within doing that then forces them to sanitize him, or to, give him purpose or give him some kind of point that he's trying to make. Obviously,
The new term is sane washing.
sane washing.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Parker Malloy, giving credit where it's due.
And I think that it's fascinating to me that we're even at a point now where that is a requirement of journalists. That's a requirement of now historians too. I mean, certainly I think the history books are filled with sanity washing, sane washing. And certainly there's lots of examples of that, to sort of color the side that won as the heroes and so forth. But I think we're seeing it in such real time right now. There isn't this idea of like, I was shocked at how quickly January 6th became, cleansed, and how quickly it was like, let's not talk about it. So, I mean, it's one thing to say, let's not teach critical race theory because that was a really long time ago. And it's, I don't want to be held responsible for something my ancestors did and da-da-da-da. This is like the idea that we're supposed to rethink what happened like 4 years ago so drastically is such a shocking thing to me.
Yeah. Let's take a look at another one of your pieces that I really like. Speaking of being memory hold, this is a bunch of classified documents piled up on Donald Trump's star, complete with a toilet and a bathtub. The top secret documents that were discovered at Mar-a-Lago seem like that should have been like yet another shock. That like, how can someone be walking away with, classified material, refuse to give it back, being the operative thing, move it around multiple times, have recorded conversations discussing where it should be, lying to the FBI investigators about it, refusing to cooperate, and then being surprised when they come and raid your compound to get it back. This should have been. This is another example of like, how could this possibly be normalized? And
right.
So I'm glad that you make this kind of image just to remind people and put it in front of them on the street of like, look how outrageous this is.
Well, I mean, that's it with, I think, we all saw the photo of the bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, and
cheap-looking bathroom.
Yeah.
Cheap, gaudy-looking bathroom.
It was a
shower curtain rings.
Curtain.
Yeah, exactly.
And we saw that picture day after day, time after time, and as you said, it becomes sane washed or it becomes normalized. So I wanted to do something, and the good thing about street art is that the environment that you put it in is sometimes enough in itself to make it a spectacle, to make it a piece of art. I suppose is a simple way of saying it. When I started out, I did these 12-foot long lines of cocaine along Melrose Avenue with a 8-foot high $100 bill sticking out of it, and the idea of that was it was a comment about the I can't remember what $600 million that Americans spend a year or whatever it was at the time on cocaine, and how that is normalized. Nobody talks about it, and the piece itself, as people walked along Melrose Avenue, would have seen this piece, and the spectacle of that large piece in itself hopefully said something to people.
Yeah. I love that the boxes are great. The toilet is great. The tub to me is the chef's kiss of
It's
just
a lot
being
of setup.
it's so much, it's the commitment to the premise, I think, is admirable for sure.
And we should point out that there's crime scene tape around it
yes,
as well.
yes, that's
for
fantastic
audio
as well.
listeners.
Well, the piece I'm most proud of, and I suppose I have an eye for detail, for attention for detail. And the one piece I'm most proud of, and I find this in a lot of pieces of my art, it's not the whole configuration thing. The one piece I'm proud of here is the toilet roll on top of the toilet.
Yes,
point that out.
That,
great.
to me,
That's the cherry on top.
yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
I'm so proud I did
It's
that.
it's that little bit of a debasement of
Yes.
I'm going to sit here and wipe myself
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
to
And I think it was
Nuclear
even,
Secrets.
It wasn't even decent toilet paper. I think it was Costco, which is probably in keeping
Perfect.
with
Probably
Yeah,
Mar-a-Lago.
exactly.
You're right.
Yeah.
Let's look at another one here. This one's also classic. I believe this was all over as well. There's bars over the Donald Trump star on the Walk of Fame, and they look pretty solid. And
Yeah, I'd like to see Edward Scissorhands try and kick those.
yeah.
They were only wood, actually. In fact,
Oh, they were?
broken.
Wow, well
And
done.
Interestingly enough, I've done a number of pieces which people comment to me, hey man, you predicted what would happen, because that was way before. I can't remember what year that was, but that was way before there were any convictions, there were any trials, there were any any indication that Trump would actually appear in any trials. So
Yeah.
that was well before that, but it's still relevant today.
Yeah. Speaking of relevant today, even more so now, this is a good one that I think went over a lot of people's heads. It's a sign that says it's on in a construction site, empty space, and it's on a fence. There's a sign that says lot reserved for future internment camp by order of Donald J. Trump, President of the United States of America. And it looks so official. I'm sure a lot of people walked by without even thinking about it. But the reality is that he's still talking about deporting 10 million people without any plan. He just used the word, it will be bloody. Right. And so hopefully this is coming up at the debate, which is going on right now as we record this. But there's no explanation as to who will be rounded up, how it'll be done, where they'll be stored, who will be paying for it, how they'll be removed. And
It
it's
will
just
include
enough to
Jimmy
see-
Kimmel and Stephen Colbert, though, apparently.
Probably. And
Subversive artists.
Yep, there you go.
yeah,
There you go.
and you saw at the RNC people holding up signs saying mass deportations now, and this is some pretty dark stuff. You know? And so it's good that you are bringing attention to it like this, but also having a picture that we can point to later and be like, boy, he called this years ahead of time, huh? This is another piece by Plastic Jesus that I really like. It's a stencil of a guy in fatigues. Looks like he just stepped out of a war zone, and stenciled on his the front of his bulletproof vest is his art teacher. What was the story behind this?
Well, again, there's a couple of pieces you've shown here which really come from my background as a photojournalist, because these pieces are created usually the next day after Trump has said something. I explained the wall around his Star Wars. What was the other one? The bars as well. There was something the previous day. So
documents,
and the documents as well. And this one art teacher, that I can't remember which school shooting it was, but
Which one?
yeah, being as a journalist, I used to travel around the US quite a lot, and these names, as I was driving on the interstates, or the freeways, all these town names I knew because of a shooting that had occurred there.
Right.
Totally blew my mind coming from the UK, where the last shooting we had was Dunblane in 1994.
Yeah.
4 or 5 or 6 or whenever it was, and they then banned guns. But this art teacher piece, there was a school shooting, and Trump had stood up and said, what we should do is arm school teachers. If there was one teacher in that school armed with a gun, we wouldn't have this problem. My mother was a school teacher, and no offense to her, but I wouldn't trust her with with a gun. But you know, here it's. I think J.D. Vance said that was it school shootings or mass shootings are a fact of life. I think he said a few days ago.
Yeah.
I mean, fuck me, it's not. This is the only country that has frequent school shootings, frequent mass shootings, and we are powerless to do anything about them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's that Onion article that they run. I don't know if you know this.
Every time.
Every single time there's a mass shooting, there's nothing that can be done, says only country that this ever happens to.
Yep.
And they run it every time. And I sort of took that same idea and ran this poster, an image of a piece of art that I created that said, "Dear world, please return my faith in humanity and stop taking it without asking for permission," or something to that effect. But I would run that every time that there was a school shooting, and it happened so many times that I just got burned out. And I know that for, God bless the Onion, that's the idea. But for me, I was just like, I can't, it breaks my heart every single time. And to have to do it over and over and over again, just it burned me out of it. And I was just like, I can't do this anymore. I have to just stop. And that was just from someone who has not actually been impacted on a personal level beyond seeing this horror happen over and over and over again in my country.
Yeah. And to Plastic Jesus's credit, he's kept up making an impact with his art. Here's a great one. He went into Target and put a bulletproof vest on one of the youth models with a tag on it. What does the tag say? Bulletproof Kids?
Bulletproof Kids as a brand.
Right.
I think it's got a money-back warranty.
Jeez.
And the other thing I did as well was a bulletproof desk.
That's right here.
Yeah, again, that was placed in a Target store. And, a family walked up and started looking around it. And the interesting thing, and I can show you the emails for this, I actually had an email from a manufacturer who wanted to know if I wanted to go into licensing these with them. That's where we are. We're actually looking at the solution for school shootings being bulletproof desks and bulletproof vests.
Yeah, like the last possible second of that crisis is like, well, what if we just put up a shield and maybe that'll work? And the idea of arming a teacher and
that's
the whole idea,
the problem.
Yeah, the whole idea of guns stopping guns. It's always like, well, it's sort of after the fact once they're firing. So pulling out a gun and firing back isn't going to undo what already happened.
Yeah.
It
becomes one of these things where you think the only thing that will make a person make the sacrifice of one of their, so-called rights is if they feel that it's impeding on another one. It's a similar sort of thing, I think, with like fossil fuels, this idea of like, we will only stop going to the gas station when it becomes way too expensive for us to afford it, and then we'll demand change. It won't matter. We're not willing to make that sacrifice if it's just our entire world that we're destroying.
Right.
It's only if it impacts us in that sort of very finite and
once
easy
it's inconvenient.
Exactly. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
It's inconvenient now.
And even before we reach that level, we also have to say, oh, well, it's definitely Joe Biden's fault that gas is expensive. It's definitely, these are all those things, to blame. So before we, consider an alternate solution, let's make sure we find who we can blame, which goes back to the self-pity thing again.
Exactly. This is what Kamala Harris had to say in response to the Georgia school shooting.
I do want to say a few words about this tragic shooting that took place this morning in Winder, Georgia. We're still gathering information about what happened, but we know that there were multiple fatalities and injuries. And, our hearts are with all the students, the teachers, and their families, of course, and we are grateful to the first responders and the law enforcement that were on the scene. But this is just a senseless tragedy on top of so many senseless tragedies. And it's just outrageous that every day in our country, in the United States of America, that parents have to send their children to school worried about whether or not their child will come home alive. It's senseless. It is, we've got to stop it. And we have to end this epidemic of gun violence in our country once and for all. You know, it doesn't have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. So we will continue, of course, to send our prayers and our thoughts to the families and all those who were affected, including, you know, I'm going off script right now, but listen, I mean, you know, at the last year, I started a college tour. And I traveled our country meeting with our young leaders, right? And so it was college-age young leaders. So I did trade schools, colleges, universities, community colleges. By the way, I love Gen Z. I just love Gen Z. Right? But I'll tell you, one of the things that I asked every time I went to the auditorium, and it would be filled with these young leaders, students, and I'd ask them, raise your hand if at any point between kindergarten and 12th grade you had to endure an active shooter drill. And for the young leaders who are here who are raising their hand, I'm telling you, every time the auditorium was packed and almost every hand went up. You know, a lot of us, I'll speak about myself, you know, we had, well, I grew up in California, earthquake drills, we had fire drills, but our kids are sitting in a classroom where they should be fulfilling their God-given potential, and some part of their big, beautiful brain is concerned about a shooter busting through the door of the classroom. It does not have to be this way. It does not have to be this way.
And then this is J.D. Vance.
Now look, the Kamala Harris answer to this is to take law-abiding American citizens' guns away from them. That is what Kamala Harris wants to do. But we have to ask ourselves, we actually have been able to run an experiment on this, because you've got some states with very strict gun laws, and you've got some states that don't have strict gun laws at all, and the states with strict gun laws, they have a lot of school shootings. And the states without strict gun laws, some of them have school shootings too. So clearly strict gun laws is not the thing that is going to solve this problem. What is going to solve this problem, and I really do believe this, is look, I don't like this. I don't like to admit this. I don't like that this is a fact of life. But if you are a psycho and you want to make headlines, you realize that our schools are soft targets. And we have got to bolster security at our schools.
To him, school shootings are a fact of life, but women without children, or he can't take it, boy. There's just got to be something done about that. We got to put them in their place. We got to force them. You know, we can use laws. We can come after them with this. We can pass laws against trans kids.
He's also obsessed with abortion.
Yes,
and the idea that something like abortion being even a necessary thing that some people don't think is great, but is a necessary part of living, perhaps even a fact of life. But no, we can make sure that even that is completely outlawed and made, and we can make as many draconian laws and rules to ban that.
Well, we got to protect the children. You know?
Got to protect the children until they're born, and then obviously it's up to
like,
them.
well, yeah, but guns.
Yeah, got to protect the guns.
Yeah, and so in debunking time, I wanted to point out that how much they're trying to get by on this story, that that Kamala Harris is only out to take away your guns. Here's a couple articles that the NRA has put out. Kamala Harris is an existential threat to the Second Amendment and supports gun confiscation. Press covers for Kamala Harris's clear record on gun confiscation. PolitiFact says that Kamala Harris supports mandatory gun confiscation, according to Donald Trump, is mostly false. And another article saying, despite lies spread by Trump and the NRA, Harris and Walz do not want to take everyone's guns away. When she was Attorney General, she did oversee a task force which would seize guns from felons who were not supposed to have them. I mean, this is a task force, guys showing up in the full gear. Someone knocks on the guy's door and says, look, you're a felon. We understand you have a gun or more. Why don't you give it to us and we'll do this peacefully? That's some scary shit. And it works.
Wow.
It actually works. And sometimes they'll be like, okay, we got the gun. Oh, and 20 more. Wow, how about that? And so that's what it takes, and it is possible. But when they talk about gun confiscation, it's usually the people who aren't supposed to have them in the first place. So,
and it conjures up this picture of a white, middle-aged man hugging his guns on the sofa as a sheriff's department or
Right.
whatever the firearms control body coming pounding on his door. Now, let's face it. There's, I think, is it 300 million guns currently in the US?
Yeah.
Now, whatever happens, if Kamala wins the election, not much is going to change in the next 4 years. But my attitude is, let's change it for my daughter. Let's change it for her children and their children and their children's children by slowly implementing these controls,
Basic
these
regulations.
and, regulations, checks, and and so on. It may be a fact of life now, but it's only a fact of life because of mechanisms that we currently have in place.
Yeah.
Let's change it over the next generation and the generation after that and the generation after that.
Yeah. And the reforms that she's running on, all of her positions are now available on her website, include assault weapons ban, stopping extended magazines, red flag laws so that people can be stopped before they make these kind of attacks, and investing in the community prevention programs, which have already been shown to work. And so these are the things that are far too easy and reasonable sounding, and which is why J.D. Vance and Trump have to go extreme. And here she is speaking about, as vice president a year ago, about why she's not coming for your guns.
We do not have a moment to spare, nor a life to spare. And here's the thing. Solutions do exist. It's a false choice to suggest you either have to choose between supporting the Second Amendment or passing reasonable gun safety laws. That's a false choice. President Biden and I believe in the Second Amendment, but we also know common sense solutions are at hand.
How hard is that?
Yeah. I mean, there's really nothing that can be said that hasn't already been said a million times about just how practical the solutions are available to us, but we refuse to utilize them. But to me, it still just boggles my mind that a person who is passionate about guns wouldn't strive for there to be more regulations and more ways to be, you think about the dad, right? I'm a dad. We're all dads. The idea of handing a hammer to your kid and saying, okay, this is a tool. This is something that you can use to do good things, or you can do destructive things with them. And I'm going to help you and going to, teach you. And you take that seriously because you recognize that you're handing something to a person who doesn't know how to use it yet, and certainly can hurt themselves and others with it,
So this is Trump's response to school shootings.
Your kid goes to school and comes home a few days later with an operation. The school decides what's going to happen with your child. And many of these childs 15 years later say, what the hell happened? Who did this to me?
To clarify, there is no evidence to support that children are changing genders in schools.
There's not sex change operations going on at schools. They can't afford books, let alone $50,000 transition surgeries at schools.
Those poor childs.
Yeah,
I also am blown away by the fact that it's not only is it so transparently a lie, but it's even mathematically doesn't make sense. So these terrible things are happening, and 15 years later, these people are saying, "What happened to me?"
Right.
So wait, are we living in the present where the sex changes are happening, or are we living in the future where they're saying, "How could they have given me this sex change?"
Yeah,
which
and
is
so,
it?
The kids don't come home for a couple of days, and we don't notice that because
full sex change happens between the hours of 8 a.m. and 3 p.m.
Yeah, because they're still recovering from the surgery for a few days, and we have to sign a permission slip for just
sunscreen.
outside. Yeah,
Sunscreen.
exactly.
The truth in it doesn't matter. It's not relevant to those people who subscribe to that point of view. It's the fear, it's the anxiety that it can build up in the audience. These people are not like you. They are a threat to you, whether they are foreign, whether they are gay, whether they are transgender, whether they are whatever. It's all about building up that fear. And if you build in that fear in people, you can then find tools to fight them with, and that's what it's about. I mean, here in Hollywood, there's been regular marches on a Saturday or Sunday, Save Our Children, about the child sexual abuse that's going on. and they conjure up this idea that children are being snatched off the street and sexually abused, and it's happening everywhere.
Conspiracy theories
Yeah,
again.
exactly. Yes, it's happening, but it's very, very, very rare. I think it's 75% of child sexual abuse happens within the family.
Of course.
It's a brother, it's an uncle, it's a father, it's a son, it's a nephew.
Yeah, that are desperate to not believe the truth and desperate to look for another boogeyman because somehow sex changes at school is worse than massacres that we're all seeing.
Right.
You know, this unproven idea of something that is physically impossible and outlandish on its face. It's like, oh, but that's shiny and distracted. You know, today it was coming out that J.D. Vance is pushing the idea that Haitian immigrants are eating cats and eating ducks. Which is, for one, stupid because, you know, there's over 500,000 Haitians in Florida, which is the must-win state. And I don't know why he would want to complicate that. But the idea that it's like, oh, but your pets are in danger.
Right.
Like, forget about your kids.
Yeah.
You know, ducks in a pond, you know, they could just pick them up and eat them. Aren't you worried more about that?
We're at an interesting time now where, as you said, there was a time when, depending which news organization you were following, they would put a certain spin one way or the other on a story. But we got to the point now where major news organizations are not even running a story because it's so bizarre. In order to run it, they would have to be critical of it because it is an out-and-out lie, and they can't do that. So it's just shoved off their website or their news broadcast, but it's there. And as far as the politicians are concerned, it's hit the target. It's made that point. It's got that message over to their audience.
Yeah.
Right.
So speaking of media companies that we can't trust, Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, announced the past week that there were indictments, he unsealed indictments for a couple of individuals that were part of RT Media, Russia Today, and that they were part of a much larger plan stemming from the Kremlin to create a massive disinformation campaign.
In the wake of Russia's brutal invasion of Ukraine, RT's editor-in-chief said the company had built, quote, an entire empire of covert projects designed to shape public opinion in Western audiences. We allege that as part of that effort, RT and its employees, including the defendants, implemented a nearly $10 million scheme to fund and direct a Tennessee-based company to publish and disseminate content deemed favorable to the Russian government. To implement this scheme, the defendants directed the company to contract with U.S.-based social media influencers to share this content on their platforms. The subject matter and content of many of the videos published by the company were often consistent with Russia's interest in amplifying U.S. domestic divisions in order to weaken U.S. opposition to core Russian interests, particularly its ongoing war in Ukraine. The company never disclosed to the influencers or to their millions of followers its ties to RT and the Russian government. Instead, the defendants and the company claimed that the company was sponsored by a private investor. But that private investor was a fictitious persona. The charges unsealed this morning do not represent the end of the investigation. It remains active and ongoing.
Russia made fake news sites, and we know we hear news, but it looks like the Washington Post. It looks like Fox News. Same graphics, same layout, completely made up stories, and it won't be .com, it'll be .xex or some other thing. To direct people to those sites, they had a shell company that was sponsoring influencers in America, hundreds of them, up to 600 of them. The company was called Tenet Media, and it went out of business the next day. It folded operations, and money was going indirectly. It went through a business in Canada, and then it was going through a donor that was supposedly supporting Tenet Media, who turned out to be a fictitious personality altogether. And so one of these guys, there were several right-wing influencers that had been spouting Russian talking points, and the Russian talking points are so embedded in the Republican dialogue they don't even stand out anymore, such as foreigners are coming to take your jobs, you know, the white man is overwhelmed, you know, we have to take our country back. And one of them in particular, of course, this is all leading to, we don't want to support Ukraine. And so in Don't Be That Guy this week, Tim Pool, who's a right-wing influencer, this is a clip of him on his show doing just that.
Psychotic. Ukraine is the enemy of this country. Ukraine is our enemy, being funded by the Democrats. I will stress this again. One of the greatest enemies of our nation right now is Ukraine. They are expanding this war. Now, don't get me wrong. I know you've got criminal elements of the U.S. government pushing them and guiding them and telling them what to do. Ukraine is now accused, a German warrant issued for blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline, triggering this conflict. Ukraine is the greatest threat to this nation and to the world. We should rescind all funding and financing, pull out all military support, and we should apologize to Russia.
It's worth pointing out.
And we should buy Putin a pizza.
Yeah. It's worth pointing out that he was being paid $100,000 per YouTube video, which is outrageous sums of money. And
I
his
think
videos,
he was doing one a week, wasn't he? So
yeah. That was, so it was like $400,000 a month. And
scroll back and forth on a
map,
on a map.
And these videos are only getting 100 to 200,000 views, so it's not a lot. And if somebody comes and offers you a boatload of cash for something that's clearly not worth it, you should know better than that. You should also probably know better than to try to claim that you're an expert in geopolitical affairs. So this was Tim Pool just after this happened.
Announced, I've been contacted by the FBI as a victim of a potential victim in a crime. They have stated that I may have information relevant to their ongoing investigation and requested a voluntary interview. So, engaging with counsel, we are going to provide assistance in whatever way we can. And that's about it. I'm
just, an FBI interview from the Department of Justice that I now have to cooperate with and probably start to name names.
I find what is also interesting is in that clip there with Tim Pool, you pull up the Ukraine one, which I think I looked at for the first time last week when this story came out. And I was kind of blown away with clearly how blatant it was. But also, there's been a lot of influence from Russia and I believe China to social media. And it's very nuanced. It's not at specific issues that are perhaps international. It's really to get division building within the US.
That's pushing it. That's getting greedy when you get into the Ukraine stuff.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah, that's not our national interest at all. Stop sending our weapons that are making a
immigrants
difference.
coming across the border from Mexico each day, or another caravan coming up, or
that's what they like to normally push. You're right.
Black people are committing these crimes in cities. It's very kind of nuanced that in the end of the day, it builds up that division within culture, within society between us. So it's not just a blatant Ukraine is bad, Russia is good. That's going on. It's been way more detailed than that.
Yeah. And so this is what happens when you throw a lot of money around. And I think I read that the companies that were sponsoring these people were starting to get disappointed that they weren't getting more out of their money, that these people were mainly just promoting their social media feeds more than they were the issues that Russia wanted to hear, which is like, you get what you overpay for, you know? What do you expect? So on the flip side of this, our white guy of the week is David Hogg, who was a present for a school shooting in Parkland, which had an armed guard on standby when he didn't do anything. So for as much as J.D. Vance wants to talk about how, we need more metal detectors, and there was a guard at the Georgia school who didn't do anything. So March for Our Lives was a group that was started by a bunch of Parkland students, and David Hogg was a loud and vocal member of March for Our Lives, and he's been consistently at the front of the movement since. And he looks very young here. This is what he looks like. I don't have a picture of him now. He's now got a full beard, and he looks like he's been doing this for far too long, and he has. But it's not just that he's standing up for against gun violence and calling out right-wing influencers and supporting politicians and starting his own organizations. What really struck me were some of his more recent tweets that touch on what we talk about here on this podcast and the idea of how toxic masculinity is so woven into our current online culture that it's enabling this kind of not just divisive rhetoric, but the sort of destructive mentality of taking everything out on people and blaming them for other things until like one person's just going to take it too far, you know, and that's all it takes for that person to have an AR-15 in their reach. And so a couple of the tweets that he posted, this was about Tim Walz, the vice presidential nominee. Tim Walz is the definition of what healthy masculinity looks like. Real men don't put others down, they lift others up. Real men don't serve themselves, they serve their communities. Real men bring people together, they don't divide them for their own personal gain. And that's a lot of wisdom from a young guy.
Yeah.
So another piece of insight from David Hogg, which stood out to me, again, going back to the point of why we're talking about on this show, White Guys for Kamala. I hope I'm wrong, but if we lose in November, I think the main reason why will be the number of young men of all races that are no longer Democrats. There's been a taboo about talking about this because we understandably are hesitant to make men a main point of conversation, given we have been for thousands of years. But we have a real problem to deal with. At this point, with 60 days to go, there isn't much we can do to recover it other than turning out more young women and trying to slow the departure of young men. I think a lot of this is caused by COVID and the epidemic of male loneliness in this country and the ensuing commodification through social media of misogyny. He's hitting it all. Wow. Long term, we have a lot of work to do to provide positive examples of what actual masculinity looks like that is not defined by putting down women or other people, but by lifting others up and being a true leader. And it got 2.8 million views. So there's hope.
I will say he and so many of his peers in the Parkland situation, while that was obviously tragic and horrible, the one ray of hope I found was hearing them speak, hearing them as articulate and thoughtful people, sensitive people, both the males and the females when they were speaking, you know.
From Florida, who knew?
Right. Oh yeah.
Exactly. But to me, I was like, that's the future. You know, if we can get, you know, if we can. And I, you know, as much as I want to, you know, praise his parents for helping instill that, I also know that he is obviously his own human being and has come to these conclusions. And
he's forged in the crucible.
Yeah, and you got to hope that he is just, you know, leading the charge.
Yeah,
that it's not that he's not the you know, and that to me was what was so great was it wasn't just him. It was everybody that was speaking from that school and that experience. That were
he wasn't even the main one. Yeah,
totally. And they all seem to be having such wonderful thoughts. And to me, it's like he's not the exception to the rule. And that to me is where I find any kind of hope in the future.
Yes. Now, in focus, I made a documentary 4 years ago called Fish in a Barrel, and it's eerily appropriate because that film was about mass shootings after Parkland, and it opens at a March for Our Lives rally, and it talks about the NRA, how they're spreading misinformation, how they've gamed our campaign finance, and then how Russia gamed the NRA to influence the 2016 elections by laundering money into what was essentially an outside arm of the Trump campaign. And so that film, Fish in a Barrel, is available on platforms and on YouTube as well for free if you want to check it out. This is just a segment I'm going to show about Russian interference in our elections and other parts of our society, just to remind people how far and how deep it's been going.
In 2016, Russia interfered in U.S. elections, something they have done to dozens of countries. They did this through hacked DNC emails released through WikiLeaks, widespread disinformation campaigns on social media. They hacked voter databases in all 50 states. They penetrated the election systems in at least 39 states.
This is incredibly significant. I mean, 39 states were breached with security by the Russians.
Russia targeted voting systems in all 50 states.
On election night 2016, exit polls showed Clinton handily winning Florida, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, and Wisconsin, states which ended up being called for Trump. Computer scientists reported evidence of rigged vote results in 3 states. In one Senate report, a Russian intelligence agent described uncorking champagne on election night 2016, saying,
Мы сделали Америку великой. top secret NSA report that concluded Russian military intelligence executed a cyber attack on at least one software company that supplied voting software and targeted local election officials. What do you make of this?
We need to declassify more of that information so that Americans can fully appreciate how broad and far-reaching this Russian attempt to interfere in our most basic democratic process.
And we're learning disturbing new detail about just how pervasive the Russian attack on the 2016 election actually was.
But it's not just our election systems.
Russian hackers were able to gain access to the control rooms of U.S. electric utilities last year.
Russia hacked into the U.S. electrical grid. Russia has agents in the U.S. Treasury Department. Russia even breached the FBI from U.S. soil.
Stunning breach of U.S. intelligence by Russian spies long before the 2016 election.
And Russia is already hacking our next elections. So between the Cold War and now, it's safe to say, no, Russia is not an ally of the United States and is in fact a hostile nation.
What Russia is doing and what Mueller really wanted us to take away from his investigation is that they will not stop. The U.S. is the #1 enemy.
So to not leave on such a downer note, I wanted to go back to something from Kamala's campaign this past week. And this video was shared widely, and I think it resonates with a lot of people here. So.
We're gonna be fine. We're gonna be fine. We are all in this together.
Yes, we are.
We're gonna be fine.
We are.
Yes, we are. Yes, we are.
Thank you so much.
Huh?
Thank you
Yeah.
so
Did you get some spices?
Oh, absolutely. I'm not a best person.
Oh, it's all good. It's all good. We're standing strong, right? We love our country.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah. That's right.
Yeah.
Who's this? Is this a relative of yours
No,
or just a new friend?
Just a new friend.
Hi.
I'm a lawyer in Pittsburgh here, and I just admire your work so much.
Good. What kind of law you practice?
Consumer protection.
Good for you.
I'm protecting consumers.
Good for you. You know, that's the work I did as AG.
Yes,
that's good
yes,
stuff.
Yes.
That's really good. Of course. Come on. Let's do it. Come on.
Oh my God, I'm shaking. Someone take it. I did not get it. Can someone take it for me, please?
Who are the yellow jackets? Come here.
They're my school.
They're your school? What school is that?
Freeport.
Freeport? What's your name?
Charlotte.
Nice to meet you, Charlotte. I'm Kamala. Are you cooking also? What are you doing here? Or did you bring an adult with you? Or are you just hanging out?
How
are you?
Can I have a hug?
Yes, come here. Of course.
The first woman, when she comes in and is crying, and she says, "I think you know why." You know, she looks how I feel. Basically, you know?
Yeah. We all feel.
Yeah. And you know, she looks like she's like, you know, like she's a battered spouse of Donald Trump by proxy. You know. And it's amazing to see how Kamala can change the energy in that room, connect with women. There's 3 different like age groups right there.
Display humanity.
The genuine empathy.
Absolutely.
She understood where these people were coming from on their concerns or their fears. It wasn't just, you know, it wasn't a disconnection.
Yeah, it wasn't a put down. It wasn't artificial.
Yeah.
She spoke to the young lawyer. She spoke to a kid who's probably, you know, 10. And she spoke to a woman her age in just a short period of time and was able to connect and give every one of them, you know,
I'm sorry,
attention.
but I would vote for anybody that goes into a spice shop. I fucking love cooking. I love spices.
There you go.
She would get my vote purely for that.
Yeah. So that's some hope for this week. So in closing, again, we do not have a Patreon campaign. We ask that you, if you appreciate our efforts here, that you contribute to the White Dudes for Harris link that will go to the Harris Walls campaign, which is at secure.actblue.com/donate/white dudes. My name is John Ennis. Thanks for listening. This is Morley, my co-host, and again, our very special guest, Nick, aka Plastic Genius. So thank you very much, and we'll see you next week. This episode was recorded at Green Lab Studios in Los Angeles, California. Our engineers were Paul Roman, Daniel Amato, and Owen Stinsmullen.